Have you ever seen a city fall apart while the people in power do nothing? When crime takes over and justice is just a forgotten word. But what if one man refuses to look away? A man who has fought wars before, but this time the battlefield is his own home. He's outnumbered, he's outgunned, but he's not backing down. And the real story, that's just getting started. You won't want to miss this. Dear listeners, before we move forward, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. The war was supposed to be over. Clint Eastwood had left it behind. Once, he was a soldier, a man who fought for his country, bled for it, lost friends for it. He had seen battles most men wouldn't survive, had faced death more times than he could count. But wars don't just happen on battlefields. Sometimes they follow you home. The town Clint had returned to was nothing like the one he remembered. It had once been a quiet American town, the kind where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors looked out for each other. But now it was a war zone. Drugs, violence, corruption. A ruthless cartel had taken over, turning peaceful streets into battlegrounds. They owned the cops, they owned the judges, and anyone who stood against them disappeared. People lived in fear. Clint had tried to ignore it. He was done fighting. He had bought himself a small cabin on the outskirts of town, spending his days fixing up old cars and trying to forget the past. But then they made it personal. It started with a scream. A neighbor, a friend. She ran into the street, her face covered in blood, crying for help. Her husband had just been killed, shot in cold blood for refusing to pay protection money to the cartel. The police wouldn't come. Nobody would. And as Clint stood there, watching her collapse in the dirt, something inside him snapped. The war had to come to his doorstep, and this time he was fighting back. The sun had set, but Clint Eastwood was still standing on that blood-stained street. His hands were clenched into fists. His jaw was tight. He had spent years trying to live in peace, but peace was no longer an option. Inside his cabin, Clint moved with purpose. He opened an old, dusty chest, his past locked away inside. His guns, his gear, his war tools. A Colt .45 worn from years of use, but still deadly. A hunting knife, sharp as ever. A shotgun, tucked away for emergencies. This was an emergency. He strapped on his old boots, slid the revolver into his holster, and took one last look at himself in the mirror. The man looking back at him wasn't a retired soldier anymore. He was a hunter, and the hunt was about to begin. The cartel ran the town like a kingdom. Their men patrolled the streets in black SUVs, their guns always visible. The police station was a joke. Every officer either too scared to fight back or on the cartel's payroll. But Clint didn't need backup. He drove into town, parking his truck a few blocks away from El Toro, a high-end nightclub that doubled as the cartel's headquarters. It was where Diego Fuentes, the man responsible for the town's suffering, operated from. Clint walked through the alley behind the club, moving like a shadow. 2 cartel guards stood by the back entrance, smoking and laughing. They had no idea death was walking toward them. Crack! The first guard didn't even see it coming. Clint's fist slammed into his throat, cutting off his breath before he could call for help. He collapsed to the ground, gasping. The second guard reached for his gun. Too slow. Clint grabbed him by the collar and smashed his head against the brick wall. He went limp. 2 down. No sound, no mess. Clint took one of their pistols, checked the clip. Fully loaded. Good. Inside, the club pulsed with music. Men in expensive suits sat in dark corners, drinking and laughing, thinking they were untouchable. Clint moved through the crowd, unseen, unnoticed. He reached the VIP lounge. 5 men sat around a table, cartel enforcers. Clint didn't hesitate. Bang, bang, bang. 3 of them dropped before they even realized what was happening. The last 2 scrambled for their guns. Clint grabbed a bottle from the table and smashed it across one man's face. The glass shattered, blood spraying everywhere. The final man held up his hands, begging, "Please, please don't." Clint leaned in close. "Tell Diego Fuentes, the war is here." Then he knocked the man unconscious. As Clint walked out, the city felt different. The cartel had ruled with fear. But now, fear had changed sides. And this was just the beginning. The attack on El Toro sent shockwaves through the city. The cartel had never been challenged like this before. By morning, Diego Fuentes, the cartel kingpin, was furious. 5 of his men were dead. One of them, barely alive, had delivered Clint Eastwood's message. Fuentes slammed his fist on the table. One old man did this? One? His enforcers remained silent. They had seen the bodies. They had seen the clean, efficient kills. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was war. Fuentes exhaled sharply, then turned to his right-hand man. "Find him, kill him, and burn his house to the ground." The hunt was on. Clint knew the cartel wouldn't take this lying down. He had spent his life fighting men like Diego Fuentes, thugs in expensive suits who thought they were invincible. But they had never met him. Back at his cabin, Clint was already preparing for the inevitable. He set up tripwires along the perimeter, rigged explosives near the entrance, and positioned himself on the roof with his rifle. Then he waited. The night was quiet, too quiet, until engines rumbled in the distance, headlights cut through the trees. 3 black SUVs rolled up the dirt road toward his cabin. Armed men stepped out, their rifles glinting under the moonlight. Clint exhaled slowly. Showtime. The first cartel soldier stepped forward, his gun raised. Click! A tripwire snapped. Boom! An explosion tore through the night, sending 2 men flying. Screams filled the air. Before the rest could react, a sniper round punched through a man's chest, dropping him instantly. Panic spread among the cartel soldiers. "It's a trap! It's a damn trap!" Clint moved like a ghost. 1 shot, 2 shots, 3. Each bullet found its mark. One of the remaining soldiers tried to flee. Bad mistake. Clint leaped down from the roof, tackled him to the ground, and pressed a knife to his throat. "Where's Diego Fuentes?" Clint growled. The man trembled. The penthouse downtown. Clint didn't need to hear more. One swift motion. Silence. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. And now, Clint was taking the fight straight to the king. The city skyline stretched before Clint Eastwood as he stood on the rooftop of a nearby building, looking across at Diego Fuentes' penthouse. It was a fortress. High walls, armed guards, and security cameras everywhere. But none of that mattered. Clint wasn't walking out of this fight. He was fighting to end it. With his rifle slung over his shoulder and his Colt .45 ready, he took a deep breath. The war had taken him this far. Now it was time to finish it. Clint moved through the shadows, slipping past security with the skill of a soldier who had spent his whole life hunting men like Fuentes. At the penthouse entrance, 2 guards stood smoking, laughing, until Clint struck. Bang, bang. 2 clean shots. No noise, no struggle. Inside, the air smelled of cigars and expensive whiskey. A grand piano sat in the corner, untouched, the life of a man who had never earned his power. Clint stepped forward. His boots echoed on the marble floor, and then a slow clap. "Impressive, old man." Clint turned. There he was, Diego Fuentes, sitting behind his desk, swirling a glass of whiskey, surrounded by 4 of his best men. Fuentes smirked. "You should have walked away." Clint exhaled, eyes steady. "You should have never started." The tension in the room thickened. Hands hovered over holsters. Someone was going to die. Fuentes snapped his fingers. His men drew their guns, but Clint was faster. Bang, bang, bang! 3 shots. 3 bodies hit the floor. The last enforcer charged. Clint grabbed him, twisted his arm, and slammed him into the glass table. The man collapsed, unconscious. Fuentes, now alone, stumbled backward. His smirk was gone. He had ruled with fear. Now he was the one afraid. Clint aimed his revolver at his chest. "This is for the people you bled dry." Fuentes raised his hands, gasping. "Wait!" Bang! 1 shot, straight to the heart. The king was dead. The war was over. By sunrise, the word had spread. Diego Fuentes was gone. The cartel collapsed overnight. The city, for the first time in years, could breathe again. And Clint? He didn't wait for applause. He holstered his revolver, walked out of the penthouse, and disappeared into the early morning fog. No medals, no headlines, no thank yous. Just a man who did what had to be done. Because in a world where justice had failed, one man had to fight a war. And now, his war was over.